would you describe the current global trend in democratic performance, and what are the most significant factors driving it?
Well, thank you very much once again. As you rightly cited, according to our 2025 Global Democracy, Global State of Democracy report, democracy is facing challenges for mounting global uncertainty. You see, the political developments in the US highlights a trend of democratic slippage in new forms and places, while conflict and insecurity are shifting policy and funding priorities in ways that put democracy and democratic support into ever greater jeopardy. Our GSOD further argues that the state and fate of democracy in the world is perhaps more uncertain than it has been in our lifetimes. And this is shaking long-held assumptions about democratic resilience and multilateralism.
Now, which regions or types of countries are experiencing the most pronounced democratic backsliding, and why?
Well, the report notes that most regions across the globe are experiencing democratic backsliding, including the Americas and Europe. However, the report noted that Africa accounts for the largest share of global democratic declines, of about 33%. And most of the countries facing declines in Africa are in West and Central Africa. Countries affected by armed conflicts, coup d'etats, or other forms of political instability.
Now, recent reports suggest more countries are seeing declines in democratic performance than improvements. How can this trend be reversed?
Well, there is need for building solidarity interventions in defending and protecting democracy, amongst progressive nations, civil societies, and other key actors. But if you note also in our Global State of Democracy report, there are key recommendations that have been made there, including number one, protecting electoral integrity. And that entails strengthening election management bodies, election monitoring, and safeguards. Number two, to defend fundamental freedoms, including press freedoms, journalist safety, and countering disinformation. Number four, to expand inclusive participation, which also entails strengthening civil society, universal suffrage, youth, minority, and diaspora engagement. Lastly, one key recommendation is on reinforce the rule of law, judicial independence, anti-corruption, and rights protection. I mean, there are quite a number of recommendations that are provided in our 2025 GSOD report.
Now, how are independent media outlets being pressured or undermined in countries with declining democratic standards?
You will note that in our GSOD reports, the current report, the 2025 report, and even the previous reports, that in countries where democratic standards are eroding, media outlets often face a mix of political and economic pressure. Governments may use restrictive laws, intimidation, or censorship to silence critical voices, while economic leverage, such as withdrawing of advertising or ownership capture, weakens media independence. These tactics, to a large extent, shrink civic space, limit access to reliable information, and undermine the media's role as a watchdog, which is essential for a healthy democracy.
Now, what new tactics are governments using to control the flow of information and influence on public opinion?
Yeah, thank you. You will note that governments today increasingly use digital tools to control information, ranging from internet shutdowns and restrictive cyber laws to orchestrate disinformation campaigns on social media. Alongside traditional censorship, they now also deploy surveillance technologies and state-sponsored online narratives to shape public opinion, often blurring the line between legitimate communication and manipulation. But these tactics, to a large extent also weaken trust in independent media and distort the democratic public sphere.
Now, recent reports point to the sharpest declines in press freedom in decades. What are the most alarming indicators to this trend?
Well, if you look at our GSOD reports and various studies, they show that the most alarming signs are the growing harassment and imprisonment of journalists, the misuse of fake news and security laws to criminalize reporting, and the spread of state-controlled or captured media that crowd out independent voices. Add to this internet shutdowns and online attacks against reporters, and we also see a systematic shrinking of press freedom that threatens the very foundation of accountable democracy.
How do attacks on journalists and the rise of fake news allegations create a climate of distrust and self-censorship?
Well, when journalists are attacked or branded as fake news, it delegitimizes their work and creates fear, pushing many into self-censorship. This erodes the public's access to reliable information and fuels a climate of distrust where citizens struggle to distinguish truth from propaganda. So ultimately, these tactics weaken accountability and corrode the foundations of democratic debate.
Now, in a record year for elections 2024, many were still marred by violence and manipulation. What are the implications of this for public faith in democratic processes?
Sorry, come again, you're breaking a bit.
Now, in a record year for elections 2024, many were still marred by violence and manipulation. What are the implications of this for public faith in democratic processes?
You will note from our various GSOD reports and also various studies that when elections are tainted by violence or manipulation, citizens lose confidence that their vote truly matters. This erodes trust in institutions, deepens political polarization, and can fuel apathy or unrest. The danger, though, is that democracy becomes seen not as a path to accountability and peaceful change, but as a contest rigged for the few, opening space for authoritarian alternatives.
Mr. Graham, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Now, beyond election day, what factors contribute to the public's perception that they lack control over their government?
Well, public perceptions of powerlessness often stem from weak institutions beyond election day, such as parliaments that don't represent diverse voices, judiciaries seen as partisan, or executives that fail to deliver on promises. Corruption, lack of transparency and limited citizen participation in decision making also reinforce the feeling that government serves elite rather than the people. So democracy must therefore be about everyday accountability and inclusion, not just periodic voting.
How are independent courts and the judiciary being compromised by political leaders?
Well, independent courts and the judiciary are often underpinned when are often undermined when political leaders interfere in judiciary appointments, when they use threats or incentives to influence rulings, or manipulate budgets to weaken judiciary independence. In some cases, courts are pegged with loyalists or pressured to validate flawed elections, turning these institutions from guarantors of justice into instruments of political power. You see, this then erodes public trust and strips citizens of one of the last lines of defense for democracy.
And finally, how can democratic solidarity among nations be strengthened to counter the spread of authoritarian practices?
Well, democratic solidarity, can be strengthened when progressive nations go beyond rhetoric and commit to collective action. This entails, sharing lessons, defending civic space against authoritarian backsliding. This also means building regional and global alliances that protect election integrity, support free media, and empower civil society. Ultimately, democracies must show unity in principle and in practice, making it clear that democratic norms are shared global good worth defending.